I've stepped away from the systematic way of doing psychotherapy and counseling because I think that there is more to our mental and emotional health than a diagnosis. Don't get me wrong, diagnoses can be helpful and they can support a person to start to find a path or support a person to start to make sense of what is going on. If we look at the DSM-5, and it's a book of disorder, it's a book of dis-ease. And I say the disorder, dis-ease as a separate word. It's a book that tells us that something is out of balance. But it's not a book that can tell us what is in balance, right? And to me, the DSM-5 has been created to just continue to perpetuate this fear-based thinking that I think creates a certain sense of control over us and disables us in a certain kind of way. For many populations of the lower socioeconomic status, for populations of people of color, for indigenous populations, there's not a place for culture and there's not a place for this racialized and intergenerational trauma to show up in those diagnoses and help us understand what's actually deeper at the root of some of this disease and disorder that so many people are experiencing. It feels like it doesn't tell the whole story. I think in our capitalistic society, we are trained to be overworked, to always live in stress. We are trained to be separate from urge. We are trained to be separate from people. And when we're separate from the earth, when we're separate from people, when we're separate from ourselves, we are going to find disorder. We are going to find dis-ease. If we just start to diagnose people, which when you work in clinical mental health and in a community mental health center, you are required to diagnose a person after the first intake session or even after the second. That is not a way of looking at the whole person and understanding the story. I can't hear a whole person's story in a 60-minute session. That's absolutely impossible. Decolonizing mental health is taking a step back to see who's in front of you, hear their story, and understand that there are systems of oppression that have created some of these traumas that are underneath.
Integrating Consciousness is a channel devised to explore a plethora of modalities accessible in supporting the collective in the exploration and expansion of self, and ultimately integrating what we've learned. The planet is shifting its vibration. Old paradigms and concepts are being challenged. Science is shifting, supporting, and merging with the teachings of ancient spiritual beliefs. The masses are feeling the shift, ultimately and collectively expanding consciousness. We are in an incredibly exciting time, yet many of us lack communities, guides, leaders, and teachers to turn to for support because we don't know how to find them. My name is Lelanea Fulton, and I'm a spiritual transcendental mindset coach and unity consciousness mentor. My intention is to create a space that supports individuals seeking personal growth by providing a wealth of knowledge, tools, strategies, insights, practitioners, and language. This will be achieved through the diverse guests I invite to this podcast. So your free and easy support of subscribing, rating, and reviewing this podcast is paramount, as is how such information can move through the platform algorithms. Every month, we will offer free and easy ways that you can acquire free coaching sessions and more with your favorite practitioner. I would also like to invite you to please share any episode that moves you. You never know when a small act of kindness can support a huge energetic shift in a person's life. We are all here to support one another through acts of kindness, and to pass along information is a tremendous act of service. So thank you, and may you recognize the powerful creator you are.
Hello, beautiful beings. Today's a really exciting day because I'm sitting down with Jessica Chacon, who is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado with her practice in Alamosa, Colorado. So Jessica utilizes holistic practices such as EMDR, AcuDetox, TRE, and therapeutic yogic techniques to support her clients, and also has a bachelor's in kinesiology. She hosts new moon ceremonies, open gender circles, is a plant medicine therapist, and currently holding a personal practice in exploring the lineage of the rose. So please welcome Jessica.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you. I love talking with you. I feel like it's super energetic and there's so much information. And it's just really exciting to be able to go deep with you.
Let's do it, sister.
So I would really love to open the door with the concept of the lineage of the rose, and wondering if you can take us deeper into that concept.
Yes. So this has been my personal practice over the last couple of years. And this came to me after hosting an open all gendered workshop where I was using oils to anoint the participants, all the people in the class, and I used rose on the heart and frankincense on the third eye space. And one of the participants came up to me afterwards and shared what a beautiful transmission she had received after receiving the rose oil, and came to me a couple of weeks later and was like, "Hey, I'm really getting this hit that you're supposed to carry the rose medicine." And I didn't really know what that meant and sat with it. And she gifted me a rose oracle card. And I started sitting with it and using with it, praying with it. And I kept pulling the lineage of the rose card. And I thought that was really auspicious, and ended up actually building altar specifically for the rose and the Divine Mother energy. And I was also having the Divine Mother energy come through some other personal practices, studying with another mentor of mine who is very connected to Our Lady of Guadalupe from the Mexican Mexica culture. And so it seems that these two are blending. And as I started to sit with the lineage of the rose card and meditate with that, one day I got a hit that is my lineage and my biological mother, whom I'm doing a lot of healing for myself with, has the last name De La Rosa, which means out of the rose. And so as we've explored this in my personal practice and in personal prayer, what does this mean? What I'm finding is that the lineage of the rose is the lineage that holds the stories and the energy and the alchemy of having the Divine Mother in our hearts, in our lives. And that's been such a thing that's been tried to be hidden from us and buried away. And so it's a way of calling the mother back into our lives, the priestess, the goddess back into our lives, which I really think in order to counterbalance the hypermasculine and toxic masculinity in our lives and society right now, this is something we have to all call forward into our hearts.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
So I'm very curious, when you're practicing the lineage of the rose, is it similar to participating in like a rose dieta, something similar that we find in South American practices? Peruvian.
I have not particularly engaged in a rose dieta. However, that's come into offering an invitation, just hasn't quite yet happened yet. And so here it is again. So perhaps engaging in a rose dieta is very soon in my yeah. But the way that I work and practice with the roses is that they're on own altars. I have 3 separate altars in my home, and I give fresh roses to my altars on a weekly or bi-weekly basis based on how, alive they are. I offer roses to the river. I offer roses to the earth after I hold ceremony. I have a grotto out in my front yard that I offer roses to the mother at as well. And so to me, it's a protecting energy for me in many ways. And it's also an offering to something greater than me. And when I offer to my altar, when I offer to my grotto, when I offer to the earth, I'm also offering to myself too. And so it's a really special practice for me. And of course, I anoint myself with my own rose oil and drink rose tea, which is so very special.
I love rose tea.
Yes.
For the viewers who are not familiar with the importance of an altar or a personal grotto or even a personal ritual, can you delve into that concept and spiritually, and even if you feel called psychologically, the value of personal ritual?
Yeah, as you said, the word psychologically that came to my mind was our subconscious mind helps us to make sense and helps us to feel more connected to life through storytelling, through ritual, through symbolism, through dreams. And so it's a part of our psyche that we ought to honor because it holds so much memory to help us remember. And to me, an altars exist in my own lineage through Dia de los Muertos. Ofrendas are created where we make offerings to the ancestors. And to me, making an altar is a very special practice to give gratitude and a practice to recognize that we are the alchemists as well. And when we create intention and concretize what our intention is, right? We take my intention of being like water and flowing. Can I bring more water like items like seashells, or actually put water on the altar to make an offering, but also to remind me what it means to be like water? And my practice is to build an altar based on the four directions. And often on my altar, whichever direction my altar is intentional. My current practice that I'm in is studying around the moon dance, and we build our altars in the direction that we're studying. And so there's that can help people become directionally aware. And to me, that's a way of helping to resource yourself. But on the altar, you can also offer items specifically for each direction. And each direction is a teaching, but also an element and often an animal. And so this, to me, it's a way of connecting to the non-human world, right? An animate world where we recognize that we're not the only energy here on the earth, that there's other energy to connect to. And yeah, that symbolism and the storytelling and the ritual to me just feels like I'm connected in my life. It grounds me.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think as someone that didn't have ritual before in my life, I spent over a decade in New York City and a couple years in Los Angeles, and was just really distracted by all of that outside of the self, right? So there was a never ending flow of external stimuli. And at that point, I hadn't done the work, and the material world was the value. The material world was concrete. And despite recognizing myself or thinking of myself as spiritual, there really wasn't a true grounding practice. And when I look at ritual and look at my ritual today, it is something that I've created for myself as a reminder to come back to myself and to celebrate myself by really keeping touch with that which I feel called to explore. And right now you're being called to the rose and being called to water, being called to certain stages in my life. For me, I like that you brought up water because water is very important for me to be constantly moving and to work with resistance rather than resistance stopping the flow of water, allowing resistance to be actually redirection of water, which can even make the flow more powerful in certain areas where that resistance is. And there's just so many beautiful things that we can bring to our own personal ritual. And not everyone has to have an altar. but maybe your ritual, your honoring of self and of your connection to the universe, to the planet, to the mineral kingdom, to the plant kingdom is through meditation, yoga, and the burning of incense, right? Or prayer, right? And I love that you opened the dialogue with your personal ritual because I think it's very important to have.
Yeah, and altars are something that we can find amongst probably almost all cultures in some way, shape, or form. They're in churches that print, in some religions, they're tears outside. They're everywhere. And so to me, to make it simpler for people who encouraging to engage with ritual in their life is to simplify it. Find just a small spot in your home, a spot that you can take your eye gaze to, a spot that you're going to walk by every day that holds some kind of symbolism for you. And we all can connect to some kind of symbolism that gets our heart space feeling again. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I know much of your personal practice, which I'd like to move into, is very much trauma informed. And you and I had a conversation about the colonialization of counseling. And we even talked about a diagnosis versus a life sentence or a death sentence. And that's not a conversation that I get to have too often with people in the mental health field. And I'd love to delve into this a little bit deeper for the viewers.
Yes, it's a big juicy one. And one that seems to actually be getting talked about a little bit more right now. But the way that I like to talk about it a little bit with my clients when they first are coming in to do some work with me is that I've stepped away from the systematic way of doing psychotherapy and counseling because I think that there is more to our mental and emotional health than a diagnosis. Don't get me wrong, diagnoses can be very helpful and they can support a person to start to find a path or support a person to start to make sense of what is going on. But if we look at the DSM-5, and it's a book of disorder, it's a book of dis-ease. And I say the disorder, dis-ease as a separate word. It's a book that tells us that something is out of balance, but it's not a book that can tell us what is in balance, right? And to me, the DSM-5 has been created to just continue to perpetuate this fear-based thinking that I think creates a certain sense of control over us and disables us in a certain kind of way. And for many populations who are, of the lower socioeconomic status, for populations of people of color, for indigenous populations, there's not a place for culture and there's not a place for this racialized and intergenerational trauma to show up in those diagnoses and help us understand what's actually deeper at the root of some of this disease and disorder that so many people are experiencing. It feels like it doesn't tell the whole story. I think in our capitalistic society, we are trained to be overworked, right? We're trained to always live in stress. We are trained to be separate from urge. We are trained to be separate from people. And when we're separate from the earth, when we're separate from people, when we're separate from ourselves, we are going to find disorder. We are going to find dis-ease. And so to me, if we just start to diagnose people, which when you work in clinical mental health and in a community mental health center, you are required to diagnose a person after the first intake session or even after the second. And to me, that is not a way of looking at the whole person and understanding a story. I can't hear a whole person's story in a 60-minute session. That's absolutely impossible. And I think decolonizing mental health is really taking a step back to see who's in front of you, hear their story, and understand that there are systems of oppression that have created some of these traumas that are underneath.
Immediately, what comes up for me is the grandfathers of mental health diagnosis, or the creators of the systems that we still utilize. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, who even had written that his hierarchy, his pyramid, was not an accurate representation of the needs of humans. It was based on European settlers within America and in places of origin. So based off of a very unhealthy internal structure, and that he had studied a particular Native American tribe at the time when he was creating the hierarchy of needs. And he had found conflict because in their communities, in their environments and culture, human was already self-actualized. You were born self-actualized. You didn't need to acquire individualized stepping stones to become self-actualized. You were born with a high level of worth for just being alive, just being human, just being a being. This is also a culture that did not see themselves as separate from nature, that they were integrated with nature. And this is also a culture where the community met the needs of the individual rather than the individual having to meet their own individual needs. So they met their individual needs of being self-actualized, which the community reflected back to them. And so it was just uphill from there. And so if we really want to talk about decolonizing our medical system, we really need to look at the forefathers, those who have brought this information that we're still using as like pillars of fact when it comes to diagnosis.
And let's be real, some of those fathers, the grandfathers of mental health, were white men. And I think that says a lot about the colonization of mental health. And no, I love that you bring up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and yeah, just how the views are, we can view human beings so much differently when we look at how Native American cultures, indigenous cultures see the human being. And what if the story was that we were born self-actualized versus a very colonial story of we were born with sin? Like, the story of that by itself can change how a human being sees themselves in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. We've been taught to come into this world small, seeking society to tell us that we're worthy of life. Of course, there's mental health issues. Anything born into that narrative is going to have mental health and self-worth issues. It is a sick system. And if we look at diagnosis, it's based on patterns, right? If we look at it, because that's the big topic right now, is NPD, right? And what I love is that the professionals, there's a couple professionals that are very loud about NPD. And I do believe that personally, narcissistic behavioral traits, which are very much related to emotional immaturity and a person's needs as a child not being met. And so there's a lack of emotional growth. And then there's the exacerbation of toxic behavioral traits, right? And so the conversation really is about that there's only a small percentage. One in particular, specialists claim that there's 1 in 6 people with NPD. Yet NPD is one of the hardest things to diagnose because those with NPD usually don't go to a therapist's office on their phone to be diagnosed. So this is a very loose and haphazard fear-based number that's being thrown out there. It's not proven.
Yeah. And underneath NPD and underneath most personality disorders is what? Trauma, right? Because these have been parts of ourselves that have had to adapt or assimilate in some kind of way and live in a place of safety. And narcissism, in my opinion, is the ego protecting itself over and over again. Yeah, I think as a trauma-informed therapist, that's what I mean, is that I'm looking behind the veil of it all, of what was the trauma that this person endured that can help them understand the story of of the patterning of the rhythm that their nervous system has learned. And then how can we repattern that rhythm? One of my mentors talks about health as like a wave, again, water, like rhythm, right? And if we were to understand what trauma is, it's when the wave hits something and a person either gets support and gets their needs met and is able to integrate what's happened when that wave hits, when health hits a trauma, if they are able to process and receive their needs and get support during that experience, then the wave is going to continue. And that's health, that's healing, that's synchronization, right? And if they're not, that's when they get stuck in that moment. And then the body absorbs it and the body keeps the score, right? The body holds that memory. And the more blocks you hit, the harder and longer time it's going to take for a person to come back into that rhythm, that wave of healing in their lives.
Just a gentle reminder that if you're doing the inner work or feeling called for deeper self-exploration and transformation, that my practice is here to support you. My role as a transcendental mindset coach is to serve as a compassionate guide and mirror, reflecting your inner brilliance and potential, because you came to this life with everything it is that you need to align with your path and purpose. In doing this, I offer a range of services tailored to meet the unique needs of each client, incorporating the support of evidence-based coaching techniques, meditation, mindfulness practices, gene keys shadow work, pattern recognition, somatic work, inner parts work, kinetic, and breath work to facilitate inner balance and alignment alongside being trauma-informed. We will work in tandem as I support you in integrating or embodying your newfound awareness and heightened openness to a higher form of consciousness. It is my intention to support you as you architecturally design the reality you want to participate in and the life that you want to live. My practice supports you in being a masterful creator of intentions. You can contact me via my website. The link is in the show notes. So thank you, and please enjoy the remainder of the episode.
When I'm working with my clients, it's something that I bring up is there's so many parts of ourselves that are frozen in time. So when we hit those blocks, that part of us in terms of development literally freezes in time and takes going back and supporting. And it doesn't mean reliving the trauma, but it's rewriting the narrative, reframing with a now adult perspective. But when you are interacting with somebody who is exhibiting narcissistic personality behaviors or sociopathic or extreme toxicity on an emotionally intelligent level, then you can even see the age of that fragment. Holy shit, I'm talking to a 13-year-old child right now.
Absolutely.
Holy hell, this is the behavior of a 7-year-old that's throwing a temper tantrum. So we can truly see an individual frozen in time that's not representing themselves at the age that they are in front of us.
Absolutely. And the more trauma that a person has experienced in their life, the more fragmented they become and the more younger parts we see frozen in time, right? A person can have a large amount of frozen parts that are going to need some tending to and some communication with to remind them that, hey, we're adults now. Hey, we know how to resource ourselves. Hey, we know how to keep ourselves safe, right? And that's going to take a longer period of time the more fragmented a person becomes. And to me, personality disorders is a fragmentation from the self.
And where it becomes a death sentence, similar with ADD and HD, ADHD, is where this person now identifies with the diagnosis as their personality. I am this. I am dyslexic. I am ADHD. I am ADD. I am bipolar. I am narcissistic, right? I am a sociopath. And something you and I have discussed because you've worked in the system and have more knowledge of what's happening in the system is that when someone commits a crime at a young age and they've entered into the reform system, that they, especially if they've committed a crime more than once, they tend to be diagnosed as sociopath. And what we recognize is that the brain hasn't even fully developed until 27, 28. And the more trauma this person has endured, the slower the development of that brain. It can even be delayed. And so this person is now associated with the belief system that they are a sociopath, which means that even as their brain has developed, they don't tend to see themselves growing out of that. No one's telling them, hey, you're still a child. Most teenagers, I would even rightly say, are narcissistic because that's part of the development of
part of the interdependence.
Yeah. So every teenager you meet is narcissistic, right? And sociopathic, like we look at the pattern of diagnosis, like you can outgrow, this isn't a prison sentence. Like you're not diagnosed as a sociopath for the rest of your life. Like you can move out of this. It's just your behavior right now is representative of sociopathic behavioral traits.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that what this topic you're talking about is so big and so complex that, and when you were naming the I am ADHD or I am narcissistic, etc., what came up for me is that it creates so much separation. And separation, I think, is what creates the exacerbation of disease or disorder is when there's a separation. And there's I'm just an anxious person, right? There's a separation from your highly resourced self, which knows how to decrease your anxiety. But then when we get to talking about like narcissistic people, they're not actually going to probably ever say I'm a narcissist because that just doesn't happen. But other people say that person's a narcissist or they are a narcissist. And same with the sociopathic, right? The antisocial personality disorder, that person is. And so there's either a separation from self or there's us separating ourselves from that person, right? Or that person is schizophrenic or that person is bipolar. These are all really big diagnoses and disorders that I do think exist in our culture. There's just not a place for them in our culture. And so that separation exacerbates it. And I worked in community corrections. A lot of these people that came through my office had already been in the behavioral health system because they've been in the judicial system. And most of them already had an antisocial disorder or personality disorder in their chart. And so I started to look at that. What does that actually mean? And I think, yes, if we are able to catch it at an early age in these teen years, or we are able to catch these people who are being put in the judicial system, often for their behaviors around theft, but most often around drugs. And so there's also a disconnect between the why a person is an addict. They're not an addict because they're antisocial. They're an addict because they're drowning in some kind of a trauma. And so there was just so much disconnect there for me that we weren't seeing that whole person and we were giving them a life sentence in some kind of way because the white coat syndrome is real. And we have this power over dynamic in our culture that we've given to people in power, like professional therapists, like doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists and things like that, that as soon as you give your power over to those people to tell you what you are, you lose the power over your own self to tell you who you are. And you forget that you can resource yourself again back to a place of health and healing, and back to a place where you can be a functioning person in society. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it's completely inappropriate and unprofessional for any diagnosis to be made of the mental health of somebody who's an addict, a drug addict, who has not removed the drug from their system and has not created separation between the urge
Mhm.
and a person. Because while you're still under the influence of that drug and the urge to have that drug in your system, your behavior is fucking crazy. It's not your
Mhm.
own. It's
Mhm.
animalistic. And so
Mhm.
how can we look at an individual who is craving this drug to put in their system and saying, oh, I think this person is NPD? It's so
Mhm.
incredibly inappropriate.
To circle it back to the decolonizing mental health, right? When you said it's so unprofessional, I would say actually it is professional to do that, because that's how therapists are trained in grad school. That's how doctors and psychologists are trained to be the pro, which to me is to have the power over. And so to also decolonize this space, I let these clients know that I work with is that, hey, I'm in the passenger seat. You're in the driver's seat. I'm supporting you. And you know yourself best. You are your best medicine keeper. And you are the person who is going to know more than me. But the moment that I bring a person in and I say, oh, you have this diagnosis, is that I'm putting myself in a place of I know more than you.
Yeah. I'm an authority over you.
Yeah. And that to me is part of the colonial
Mhm.
perspective on mental health.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's designed how it's supposed to be designed.
Oh, God. It's so dangerous. I really want to touch on what you said about the divisiveness and the separation. As these particular individuals who have really brought light to the toxic behavioral patterns of those associated with narcissistic personality disorder, there's a benefit in recognizing those patterns. But what we've also done is empowered a community of people who are very much participating in toxicity and those toxic behavioral traits. And those people are the first ones to point their finger at someone that they feel slighted by and make that accusation that this person's a narcissist, this person's a sociopath. And so now we've got this casting of spells of he is, she is, and this divisiveness and this separation. And again, it's the other versus me. And so it's that perpetuation of the other in separation. And there is so much more damage that happens when we target someone and we say they are the other, they are separate, rather than
Okay.
bringing them in. I love you and I want to see a healthier relationship and I want to support you, but pushing this person away and ostracizing them. It is the equivalent of shame, right? It is shame on you for not knowing better, for being
Yeah.
frozen in time and fragmented.
hmm Yeah, it's so complicated, right? Because I want to also be mindful and careful to not dismiss that there are narcissistic personalities out there. And yes, they're really hard to diagnose. And yes, underneath it all is a really hurt and traumatized child who didn't get their needs met. And that person may not ever heal from that, because it takes accountability and responsibility to show up and say, okay, I'm ready to do that. And a person who may be in a relationship with somebody who's displaying traits of that needs the empowerment to say, okay, I'm not crazy. This is actually existing. And can I set a boundary? And so Where I think the separation could be supportive is by way of personal boundaries, to letting that person know I'm worthy of setting a boundary. I'm worthy of a healthy relationship. And so this is not okay to me. And where the separation I think becomes toxic is to just say that person has this and not looking in the mirror and saying, okay, what does this mean about me? What does this say about my trauma? What does this say about my needs? And so I think as long as there's that consciousness of like, where am I in this puzzle? And what do I need to protect me from that? And then also being able to have compassion for what that other person is going through. And I did a workshop yesterday talking about ecosomatics and talking about the ecotone. I read a book called Coming Home to Our Bodies by Abigail Rose Clark. Such a beautiful book about somatics and like social justice and just coming home to our bodies. And she does a cool job at talking about um, our physiology and the biology and also about the earth. And ecotone is comes from the word ecology, the konos, meaning tension. And so an ecotone is the place where two ecological systems are starting to mix and blend. And in that space, the earth doesn't see conflict or the earth doesn't see tension as the problem. Humans see conflict as the problem. The earth sees it as an opportunity to create something different. And yeah, and there's actually species that can only live in the ecotone, right? We actually live in ecotones too, right? If we really learn that the same area of our brain that creates pain creates pleasure, that's our ecotone. If we learn that sadness and joy live in the same place, that's our ecotone. And really somatically being in that ecotone, being in that middle place, the middle ground is that place where we're going to keep ourselves in connection and keep ourselves in compassion and less in separation.
Absolutely. And would you say is this something that I work on with my clients who are dealing with fear-based mindset is that I keep turning it around to faith. And faith and fear are at different opposites of the spectrum. So based on where your mindset is will determine if you're leaning into the fear or if you're leaning into faith. Because ultimately both take a belief system and both are visionary aspects. Fear is perceived to occur. Faith is perceived to occur or have occurred, right? So just different vibrations at the end of the spectrum. Would that be an ecotone?
Yeah, the ecotone is the middle space between the faith and the fear, right? Getting yourself to be able to hold both at the same time. And fear is built so deeply into our nervous systems because we live in such a fear-based culture, but also because of the negativity bias. And it takes a lot of work to move out of that place into a place of faith, right? Into a place of love or into a place of trust. And so really, if we are paying attention and we are conscious, we are going to be resourcing ourselves out of a place of fear all the time, all day. Yeah, and then on our surroundings and what it is that we do and who we're with, etc.
What I'm recognizing is that the mindset is tethered to the nervous system. So there's no changing of the mindset until the nervous system is tamed or calmed, right? And if every day we're operating with an activated nervous system that is easily triggered, that is easily flooded, then there's no way to shift that mindset because that nervous system is sending a chemical response through the body and the belief system, the narratives are tied to it. So when I'm working with a client on calming the nervous system, and reframing the narratives to support the nervous system in becoming calm, and to being in the moment, recognizing that the reality is not a threat, but their immediate circumstance is not a threat. And then getting them to this recalibrated space of homeostasis, that they can start recognizing that they can analyze their day and start recognizing, oh shit, that behavior just activated my nervous system. Or when I got onto social media, my nervous system literally just got activated. Or when I get in the car in traffic, I just got activated. And so when we can start looking at the accumulation of events that is activating us, and then we start sitting in that event and reframing what that event means and giving it a new belief system, then we're supporting the nervous system and recalibrating, which means then that we can start changing the mindset from fear-based. And there's no calming of the nervous system and moving out of an unhealthy mindset when you're perpetually subjecting yourself to the news, to constant media content intake, to unhealthy and toxic people who are projecting fear upon you. And I want to say it's such an epidemic. It's this lack of consciousness around, how does my body feel in this moment with this person, or watching this content, or listening to this music. There's such a lack of awareness, but when a person becomes aware, they are literally able to change their life in such an incredible way.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's a good segue to talk about resourcing. I've mentioned that a couple times, so I want to make sure people understand what I mean by that. I think we can shift the nervous system through, which I think the mind is involved in this a little bit, but we can shift the nervous system based upon where we place our awareness. And we can shift the nervous system by using the mind to engage with our senses that tell us in real time something that is positive, neutral, calming, or safe. I like positive and neutral a little more because for people who are very disconnected and very disembodied, don't actually know what it means to be calm or safe. But we can find neutrality pretty easily for everybody. And we can find something that feels like it's not activating. So I think that's a way we could use the mind to downshift the nervous system. But yeah, you're so right. Like doing media cleanses and taking a moment to step back from all the technological world, which in and of itself exacerbates our nervous system because of the energy that it radiates. And yeah, resourcing is, can you identify neutral, positive, calming, or safe information in your sensory system in the present moment that's going to titrate you back towards a new state of homeostasis. And then you can move back out here and then you come back, right? So it's coming in and out of your window of presence.
So checking in with yourself and recognizing, right now, I am safe. There is no external threat. I have my house over my head. My bills are paid. Mortgage or rent is paid. I've got income. There's no violence. There's no physical threat. So right now, in this very moment, I am safe. Then the mind goes, yeah, but what about tomorrow? You could lose your job. No, my business is right now, in this moment. And in this moment, I am safe. And bringing yourself back to a place of homeostasis, because when your nervous system is in a state of neutral, then when you do start to look at a problem that is coming into your ether, you're seeing it from a very different perspective than you are from an activated, flooded nervous system. Because from an activated, flooded nervous system, this is a threat. This is a threat. When you're looking from a neutral or higher than neutral position, you don't see a threat. You see some resistance that's coming your way that's easily solvable. You see a challenge. You see something that you are resourced and you know that you can navigate around. And from a very positive mindset, you're actually able to see the gifts that are associated with that challenge.
Yeah. And that's where I think that nature comes in such a powerful way, and why I bring so much nature and connection to Mother Earth and into my practice. Because when I think about the people who actually may have lost their job or maybe don't have some income coming in, the sense of safety actually is a threat in our capitalist world, right? But what if we went outside and took a moment to connect to the earth? The earth can teach us about abundance by just being out there. And how can we shift our perspective of abundance and even our perspective of prosperity based on our connection to earth and the medicines and the food that she can provide? How would that change our perspective to money? How would that change our perspective to a job, or how we're bringing that into our lives? And could that support a person to feel more resourced, to find a sense of income or a new sense of safety around what it means to have or not have money? And what would it mean for a person who maybe doesn't have a lot of family or a lot of friends in their life at the time, to go outside and recognize that the earth wants to love you, that the earth doesn't make any judgments. And that's a place where you can always belong. You can always feel a sense of belonging. And I think that can help shift a person's perspective of feeling love from the outside in, but then love from the inside, bringing it down into the soma. And that might shift the perspective around, okay, what do I actually have around me?
I want to piggyback on that because one of my favorite things to do is to demystify wooism, because there's a knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people who I don't think really understand where science meets spirituality. And then with quantum physics evolving, we're actually learning that each of these Eastern philosophy knew way more than we've given them credit for. And even quantum entanglement was talked about over 5,000 years ago. The planet has a Schumann resonance, which is an electromagnetic field. Plants, trees also have an electromagnetic field. And we humans have an electromagnetic field. For us, it extends anywhere from 3 to 6 feet out of our body. And the University of Washington did an amazing study on the electromagnetic field of trees. So for anyone that loves to go out and hug a tree, we see children always playing around trees, leaning on trees, hugging trees, swinging from trees. There's a natural gravitation of children to trees, and it has an electromagnetic frequency. And the concept of grounding is very scientific. When we sit and immerse ourselves into nature, it helps balance out and even support when we're deficient in supporting the balancing of our own electromagnetic field.
Reality is, without the trees, we can't breathe.
Yeah.
Without the plants, we can't breathe. We receive our oxygen from that. And just a fun little piece into that is that we have dendrites in our body, dendrites in our lungs related to breathing. And dendrites means little trees. So we have little trees inside of us too. And yeah, and I think that I appreciate you demystifying, which is really funny that we have to demystify nature.
I know. Talk about separatism. The medical community has done a really great job of creating separatism in nature. We can continue to exploit nature in our burn, baby burn, drill, baby drill mantra of what it is to be a human being. And
yes, I was just a part of an event with a woman named Stacy who has Parker X, or prescribes nature. She's like going around helping doctors to learn to prescribe nature versus just medication. And she just did this presentation around people who live around, well, part of her presentation was a study that she showed people who live around green areas have actually lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of cholesterol, lower levels on all of our different health symptoms that tell us we're in stress. And the people who live in more urban areas around buildings and cars and concrete jungles, that those people showed automatically to have higher levels of stress symptoms. And so this is science, but it's also just, it makes sense that when we're around nature, that our body is going to respond differently.
Absolutely. I can attest to this personally because I grew up in the valley between West Virginia and Ohio and left there when I was late teenager. And I moved to Germany and I've lived in numerous places where I was surrounded by nature, where I was in the mountains. And then in New York City and Los Angeles, and immediately left after about 15 years of urban life and quickly moved to Alaska. And my nervous system had reset and it started to feel there was this childlike enthusiasm for the world that I had in my teens when I lived in West Virginia. And my creativity started coming back and how I wanted to express myself started changing. And I felt like I was coming back home to myself. And ever since leaving Alaska, I have not been able and have no interest in moving back to a city. And the noise pollution and the pollution of being stacked on top of one another and being subjected to people who are exhibiting very toxic and unhealthy behaviors and like having that close of proximity to those people and not having a way to remove yourself and recalibrate and strengthen your electromagnetic field and to support it is very detrimental to one's mental health. I can attest to this. In New York, I used to wear ear pods and I would play like classical music to juxtapose the noise that was happening outside because of my nervous system was so activated. I had to find internal calm. I never would have made it there for 13 years. But
Absolutely.
yeah, the nature
I
is
actually
incredible.
just worked with a woman who flew out here from New York City last week. And just being out here in Colorado, close to the mountains and the river and nature here, was that was part of the medicine. Like that in and of itself downshifted her nervous system to a place where she was like, wow, I didn't realize how sick living in New York City was actually making me, because I can't even talk to people. And when I'm walking down the street, people aren't making eye contact with me, which says so much about how our nervous system responds to that and how our nervous systems are interacting. Fear state, looking down, right? Now that fear state of going inward and
Yes.
keeping our here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
constantly being on high alert for a threat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I know that your partner, who we've featured on one of the episodes, Trey Bell, really involves a lot of wilderness into his work. And I'm very curious, how much is wilderness intertwined into the work that you do?
Yeah, I actually worked in wilderness therapy for 2 years in Durango, and the work was so powerful and have definitely integrated it into my work. But also my relationship with the earth is just so integrated that it's just not even a question. From actually taking people, I have a downtown location of my studio, but I take people out to the river, to the park, and we do work out there for resourcing. But when I run my one-on-one trauma retreats, I make sure that hiking, forest bathing, being outside is part of it, because that is a second therapist to me, if not the first therapist, because that in and of itself is going to automatically regulate a person's nervous system and help a person feel a sense of calm and safety and feel like they can be somewhat embodied, especially when we're walking, right? Walking is actually how Francine Shapiro, who founded EMDR, was walking and realizing her eyes were darting as she was processing a traumatic situation in her life. So is the first EMDR right there. And yeah, the other way that I incorporate nature into my work is through hosting full moon ceremonies and hosting ceremonies around the equinox and the solstices. And so last night I just held a fall equinox workshop around transition and thresholds to help people recognize that we are creatures of change. We are creatures of patterns and transition. And to when we honor and observe the changes of the moon, the phases of the moon, and when we honor the changes and phases of nature, we are honoring ourselves. And it teaches us to not get a full place of expansion because that has its impact, and we can't get stuck in a place of contraction. And so we have to expand and contract. We have to recognize that we will rise, but we will also fall. And we have to recognize that sometimes life is going to harden us, but it doesn't mean that we can't also let life soften us. And so again, there's the finding the ecotone, finding the balance in the middle, right? Recognizing that nature has a lot to teach us about who we are because we are nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And aligning with the breath, inhale and exhale is nature. It is season. It is expansion and contraction. And that just because we contract does not mean that we're making ourselves small. It means that we're coming home to self, finding grounding before we open back up and expand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And right now, as we, here in Colorado, as we transition into fall, the earth is telling us, hey, I'm ready to go into a place of contraction. I'm going to pull back and become a seed again. Or the trees are saying, I'm going to pull back my energy from the limbs and bring it back towards my center so that I can harness my energy to then grow again in the spring and to be fully open in the summer. And the same thing with the moon, right? The moon is only full once every 28 days. So why do we expect ourselves to always be fully open and bubbly, right? If the moon is only doing that once every 28 days, can we have some more compassion and patience and slow ourselves down from feeling like we have to be the same all the time?
Yeah. And as women, I hope that this concept feels very innate. Our cycle, 28 days, the moon, 28 days, the evolution of our body, every 7 years, new cellular makeup, like new growth, like nothing, everything is seasonal. Nothing is meant to be forever. That's a contract. Life isn't binding. It's flowing. It's evolutionary. It's movement.
Yeah,
The more we
and
realize
there's a lot of Eastern practices that say the moment that you hold on forever, the moment that you think you have something forever is the moment that you lost it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want to move into your ceremonial work because the circles that you hold are not just women's circles, but they're actually open to all genders. And I want to move into that. Before I move into that, though, I just want to recap a little bit of what we spoke about for those who are listening. And so you and I spoke about the importance of nervous system regulation, using grounding, using nature to bring the nervous system back to homeostasis, to find balance, to find ecotone. And so I'm wondering, as I highlight these, if you can just throw a couple of quick suggestions out for the everyday viewer, maybe the city dweller, maybe those who are 1 foot in, 1 foot out, just to give them a few things that they can bring into their practice and make a part of their ritual to better support their personal vibration in their nervous system.
Yeah, the number one that comes up to me that's with us in every moment is our breath, right? It's just taking a moment to feel the inhale and feel the exhale and letting the breath find you if it's hard for you to find it, right? And the breath is nature. And if you don't have any sort of connection with the breath, I think that's the number one thing to bring in. If you don't have complete access to getting outside in nature, if you live in an urban place, bring nature inside, bring some plants, tend to plants, bring in pictures of nature on your wall, bring in sounds. Sometimes people are not as able-bodied and maybe they feel more stuck in their home. And if instead of listening to Taylor Swift all the time, maybe you can turn on some more ambient music that has sounds of birds or sounds of water. And so I think there's ways of resourcing nature to come in. And one of the things in my breathwork session last night, one of the women mentioned, it's really hard for me as the moment I started feeling tingly and blissful, it was really hard for me to go there. I noticed myself pull back and I was too afraid to feel the good. And so what my suggestion was, in the moments that things become difficult to feel, whether it's good or whether it's bad, right? The being in the eco tent, use your breath to go deeper. Your breath is the tool to say, I'm going to step in, take a deeper inhale or take a longer exhale, and trust your body's ability to be in that discomfort.
Absolutely. One of my favorite techniques that I use while walking, while driving, at a stoplight is box breathing. And the longer the hold on full and the longer the hold on empty, it's sitting and resting and finding safety in the body's discomfort. The body letting the mind know, we will take another breath here momentarily, but right now, I want you to find comfort in this space that you're not used to, and vice versa. And it's this really beautiful ability to test ourselves, to allow ourselves to sit in discomfort and recognizing that we are our own safety, because we will bring the next breath back in, or we will release and exhale the held breath. And it's an amazing way of chemically balancing the nervous system and bringing that nervous system back to calm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Paying attention to the space in between. That is so powerful. Noticing the space between the inhale and exhale. Because for some people, it could be activating to focus on the inhale or activating to focus on the exhale. So, what would it be like to focus on the space between? What would it be like to focus on the space between moving your arm down to moving your arm up? See the space between, find the space between. We literally have doorways that teach us about the in between, the thresholds. That the doorway is this threshold and the bottom piece is the transition. So we literally have doorways in our home where we can go have a fun exploration of like, ooh, what do I feel when I'm in the kitchen? And then what do I feel when I'm in the bathroom? What do I feel when I'm in the hallway? Now, what do I feel when I'm in the room? Well, that's a fun, accessible experiment that people can do in their homes.
I love that. And
Yeah.
then just a couple grounding ideas of using your senses, the 5 senses that you know for certain that you use. Define grounding in the moment to bring yourself back to present when your mind is projecting on the future or ruminating on the past. When we ground ourselves and bring ourselves back to present, we help the nervous system to come back to homeostasis. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah. I like to think about the resourcing our senses from the way of if we are ruminating on the future, our mind is moving fast and it's usually taking us up and out. So it's windy energy. Anxiety is windy energy. And what happens if we're out in the wind? We need grounding. We need warmth, right? And so getting the body to be warm, maybe that means moving towards warmth, or maybe it literally means sitting on the ground, putting your feet barefoot on the ground. One of the things I like is when I'm feeling really overwhelmed is I like to lay with my heart and my stomach on the ground, and that automatically regulates the nervous system, right? Alligator pose, that's a really powerful one. When we're stuck in the past, to me, that's more of a frozen energy. And so what happens when something's frozen? We also have to warm that. And so that might mean get up and move. So you're not stuck in the past. You're not stuck in that frozen energy. One of my favorite things, and actually I just saw recent research of one of my favorite things for like depression and being stuck in the past is dancing and anger. That's a big one, right? For people who may tend towards the anger. To me, anger is inflammation. It's a lot of fire in the body. And so what do we need with fire and inflammation? We need water. We need coolness. Drink a glass of water. Put your hands under cold water. Splash your face with cold water. Grab an ice cube, something like that. And that's why I like to think. And then you can also use your eye gaze to look around, even just like turning your head sideways is going to activate the vagus nerve. But as well as when you're using your eyes to look at different colors and finding something in your home that's calming, soothing, etc., something that's engaging or pleasurable, moving the eyes is automatically going to re-engage the nervous system back into the present moment too.
And beautiful. Really great tips. Really great
Mhm.
tips. So now I would like to move into the beautiful circles that you hold, and you hold moon ceremonies. And these aren't limited to one particular gender. These
Yes.
are all genders welcomed. And I'm wondering if you
Mhm.
can talk to this a little bit.
Yeah, I think that we have found our place in society where we are creating like women's circles and women's retreats and men's retreats, right? And I think that there's a lot of value in that. I'm hosting a retreat in a couple weeks that is women only, and there's a certain intention around that and why I'm having women only in that space. But for something like a moon ceremony, my intention around that is that the connection to the moon is not just for women, that men also can learn how to resource a relationship with the moon and a relationship with nature. Because to me, that is a way of supporting the masculine to also embody the feminine. And in my experience of having men show up at these ceremonies, now I will say that the majority is women, that oftentimes there's one, two, or three men present. And so it is the minority that goes there. But every time that they've been present, they've mentioned like, wow, it feels so good to be in this feminine space. Like it feels soft and I feel held and I feel loved and I feel seen. And so they too are really craving and yearning for this loving soft energy. And I'm not going to say that the feminine's always soft, right? Because like the rose, the petals are soft, but there's also thorns. So we know how to tune into that if we need as well. But yeah, I want to make sure that in those spaces that I'm also supporting men to reconnect to these cycles because they too are a cyclical human being. And I want to integrate my brothers into the space. And I have many male friends who are so dear to my heart that are really in this place of transitioning. How do I move out of my hyper masculinity? How do I heal the toxic masculinity within myself so I can show up as a better man? And so I'm finding that these ceremonial experiences are healing for not only women, but also for men too. And I, as a woman, find myself that I also learn so much from men too. Like I have a masculinity within my own self that I know is toxic sometimes because of this patriarchal society. And so I also am learning how to harness my positive masculinity and as well as healing and empowering my femininity.
Yeah, I literally am moved to tears as we talk about this. So 52% of my clients are men. So there's this rhetoric in society right now from women who are doing the work where there's a little bit of the male bashing, right? Because dating is really difficult for a lot of these women. And so there's some male bashing on men aren't doing the work. They're not doing it enough. And so with 52% of my clients being men, I can attest that there are really beautiful men out there with the intentions of doing the work so that they can make themselves safer for themselves and safer for the feminine. And what I love about your all gender inclusive ceremony, especially the moon, is that So what men have seen, young boys, young men growing up, what a lot of them have seen are women in their hyper masculine, because a lot of these women are single mothers raising boys on their own, which men need a father. They need a masculine. It's so healthy for them. So we've got women hyper in their masculine who are also in the workforce, who are also trying to climb ladders so that they can provide better lives for their boys. And so young men are seeing women more in a hyper masculine state with an unregulated nervous system than they are seeing what it looks like when a woman is in her feminine, feeling soft and regulated. And so when men get to enter into these circles where women can relax and can sit in a space that is very native to them, right? Immersed in nature, recognizing the moon and the cycle of the moon, recognizing their own cycles and being amongst other women, they can see women operating in a very soft and feminine space. And I think that is so imperative and crucial for men to get to recognize this other space, because then it also allows them to want to be a safe masculine container for the feminine in their lives, so that the feminine, knowing what the feminine can rest into when the nervous system is regulated and they also feel safe.
Yeah, that it's beautiful. As you were talking about that, I can just feel my body like softening and melting in different kinds of ways. Yeah, I think it comes back to the separation, right? We're experiencing so much separation in our society. And I think that this just brings the togetherness. We need each other.
Absolutely.
Each other. Women need women as sisters and sometimes as lovers, but we also need our brothers and our father figures and that masculine energy as well.
I had a situation occur last summer, which this also will loop us into some of your work as a plant medicine therapist. But I had my first ayahuasca ceremony, and I was very curious if there was ceremonies that were all women based, male based, and I learned that this was a all gender inclusive ceremony, and there was about 30 people. Some of them, this is their third, fourth, fifth, the fifth particular facilitator, and it's very music oriented, bringing back the language and the harmony and the music and the ways of the indigenous Amazon peoples. Total honor. The ceremony opened up in full honoring all the tribes of the land that we were sitting on, paying homage via prayer. And then the facilitator or shaman, whatever the title is you prefer, started the ceremony by saying, no leaking of sexual energy, that this is all inclusive, that this is a safe space for all genders, that this is not a place for fornication, for dating, for sexual hookups, for flirtation, even, that to be mindful of how you leak sexual energy. And I had been privy to the leaking of sexual energy as a woman, as a young girl, the weird old men that are just perversion and leaking of this sexual energy onto this young child and feeling it and feeling almost responsible for it in a way. And, and it really made me sit and think. And I was wearing a linen dress, and the sleeve was a strap, and it was slipping off of the shoulder as he was saying that. And I sat as the observer and looked at myself, and I said, are you leaking sexual energy? Could the slip of the shoulder, could this be perceived sexually, unintentionally, but sexually? How are you holding yourself? How are you sitting? And I recognized that I had been groomed for so long since childhood to want to be seen as beautiful, but beautiful in our society means to provoke desire from others. So here I was sitting there with the sleeves falling down and the skin showing. And even though it's absolutely something to be proud of, is the femininity of me. This was not the space for it. This was a space to be conservative, to not provoke desire in another intentionally or unintentionally. So to be aware of the self. And I really was able, before the ceremony even begun, to recognize how groomed this was in me from society, from all of the old Audrey Hepburn films or whatever that I'd been raised on, of like sexuality, over sexuality. And so during the ceremony, at one point there was dancing and I didn't participate. I wasn't in the space where I could. I was going through my own thing. But I remember by the candlelight watching a man dance. And I remember for the first time in my life that I could see what it looked like for a man to sit in his masculinity in a beautiful way, this really strong, safe container of masculinity, while also having one foot in the femininity, feeling very free to move and to channel and to be connected with his internal rhythms and then the external rhythms of the music. And the dancing wasn't to provoke desire. It wasn't to bring attention. It was his own ritual of self and self-expression to something greater. And him feeling into his body and feeling the groundedness of what, and I'm feeling everything that this man is putting out there. And I remember moved to tears and just thinking how beautiful this human being is. And I could experience, I was merging with him and could experience this feeling. And it's just, I was so extremely grateful that it was all inclusive of genders.
Absolutely. Exactly. Like you just got to learn something about your own conditioning and something about yourself and seeing that person as a human versus that person as a man's exactly. Seeing the person as a human and not as a gender. And yeah, just briefly, I have a 14-year-old and she's in middle school, and we were having a conversation the other day where she was like, I think it's so stupid that I can't wear a spaghetti strap shirt, but I can wear a dress. And it was like a moment of really teaching her about how society has created these narratives around what it means to be a girl. And she recognized that there are so many other roles for the girls in the school and what they can wear versus the boys. And it just really disheartened me. And she mentioned that one of the sports coaches in the next sport she's going to play said that the girls can't wear dresses, they have to wear pants. And it's infuriating that we think we've come so far, but we really haven't. We are still in some of these old ways of thinking that just because my tank top is falling off my shoulder that I'm leaking sexual energy. Actually it's because my shoulder just dropped and I'm not paying attention to my posture.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a deep wounding for us as females, and bringing it back to my studies with the lineage of the rose, I think that's also a way of healing my sexuality. And I've always considered myself a pretty sexual woman that knew actually how to use my sexual energy in ways that were not healthy and used it as a power over. I'm learning how to embody and embrace my sexuality in a really healthy and supportive way. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I recognized for myself how I had used the ability to provoke desires in other as a form of manipulation, of getting what I wanted or what I thought my needs were at the time, or even to get consistency of behavior from the other. And it is such an incredibly toxic behavior that we've been ingrained with from a very young age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that topic up about having the all-inclusive spaces, and there's time and place and intention around all of it.
Yeah. And I'd like to segue this into your work as a plant medicine therapist, as well as moving into the concept of deconstructing spiritual materialism, because
Mhm.
they're very much a part of one another at this
Oh,
time.
man. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I actually did what feels like a colonized version of a training to become a psychedelic assisted therapist. But as a licensed clinician, there are hoops that I need to jump through to be law abiding citizen, you could say. But there again, like I am afraid of what could come down the drain, could come down the line as Colorado legalizes psilocybin and natural medicines to be used because of spiritual materialism. I'm already seeing it, the trainings to become a mushroom facilitator are from $4,000 to $7,000 for the privilege, right? Like I make a relatively decent income and that's hard to access it after I've already invested in another program. And so the monetization of something that's so sacred, the monetization of something that has been used for a long period of time from the indigenous people, right? Again, we take the medicine away from the native people and now we are reintroducing it in this very white colonized way. There's a disconnect problem. Exactly. For a high price. And actually in the first beginning stages of some of the legislation, they were not actually going to let like Native American churches be able to charge, which is so wild to think that they were even considering, or you're going to let therapists or people who own wellness centers be able to charge this high price. But again, you're not going to let people who have Native American churches not be able to charge. They have to do it for free? No, no. And I'm grateful for the people who are on the front line using their voice and making sure that this is just all the way around. Yeah, we live in a society where we are monetizing everything and spirituality loses its sacredness the moment that we monetize it. So obviously, we have to make a living because we live in this capitalist society. But I think for me personally, the consciousness is always coming back to giving gratitude first for my relationship to nature and the medicine, offering next. What am I capable of offering? How am I giving back? And then receiving. And so my intention and my hope for lots of people is to bring in the law of reciprocity around this. Is is the exchange of what I'm giving in alignment with what the other person is receiving? And is what the other person giving in alignment with what I feel is energetically appropriate to receive, right? And so those conversations are at the forefront before the work even starts. And taking this is where I bring wilderness into it too, is taking people outside and asking permission from the earth, which kind of incorporates a little bit of muscle testing in the way that we were talking in one of our earlier conversations, but teaching a person how to go out into nature and ask permission and receive an inner yes or receive a no, in how to make sure that we're in relationship with what it is that we're actually doing here. If you are trying to have a relationship with the plant medicine, but you don't have a relationship with the nature, there's a disconnect. You're trying to receive consciousness in this ecstatic experience, this evolved experience, but you're not willing to step back and do the actual work. And this is where I think preparation and integration are so important, is that if you're not engaging in the practices that are going to calm your nervous system or connect you to nature, or you're not engaging in practices of love prior to coming into this, what makes you think you're going to connect with that?
And I love that you brought that up. But that's what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of people chasing experience and not doing the work. And I sat down with Mystic Paul Diamond, who has a place in Peru, PSAC called Tantra. And it is such a beautiful place. And he's an ayahuasquero, but he does not perform plant medicine on those who are not there coming there to do the pre-energy work, really working on the subtle bodies and the different energies to find your grounding. Because if you're not open, all it is a hallucinogenic experience.
And sometimes it's not even that. I'm going to give a couple examples without obviously identifying anybody, but I've given people heroes doses who told me that they were engaging in the dieta, the mental, emotional, and also nutritional practices the weeks prior. But when it came down to it, they actually weren't. And so their subtle body was blocked from receiving, and to take up to a hero's dose, no hero was seen. I think that has shown me multiple times how important the pre-work is. And as a practitioner, facilitator, space holder, I can only do so much because a person can show up and lie to me or lie to themselves. And I've stepped back from really stressing out about those moments and trusting the medicine and my relationship with it so much that I know God's either going to show up or not. The spirits are going to show up or not. And that is based upon that person's preparation and willingness to do the work, or being integrated in the work. And to me, it's a sacrament. It's a sacrament of communing with nature itself and a higher consciousness. And the integration comes in with that as well. Of you can take all the medicines and do all the ecstatic practices you want, but if you're not incorporating the everyday, making the mundane sacred, if you're not practicing love in the daily basis, then you're going to keep searching for something. And this goes not even for medicine, but like the yogic world has been so spiritually materialized. Like we all think yoga is just this go into a yoga studio and practicing. That's not yoga. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's been
That's
so
a
bastardized.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole practice is your lifestyle. And even Ayurveda is a connection to nature and food and medicine. And so this happens in so many different realms. And so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all evolves. And I hope that the people who are feeling like called to offer this, that we stay grounded and rooted in what it is we're actually doing here. And that this, to me, I'm also in a place of, you know what, the mushroom's in an intelligence, it knows what can happen, and trusting that's out of my control.
Yeah. Yeah. I looked into the certification in Oregon, which is anywhere between $8,000 to $10,000. There's only two organizations. One went bankrupt, and it was the one that was charging about $10,000 to $12,000, and they left in the mid-program for the people they were certifying. And then the one that remains costs anywhere from $8,000 to $9,000 to be certified. And there's no facilities yet that you can work at. So you're certified, but you can't really do anything with it because the legislator hasn't really approved the happenings yet. But you can do it on the DL, which if you investigate it, you'll see facilitators who are charging. Some of them will have beautiful tiny houses on their property. And so they're charging anywhere from $1,800 to $2,500 a night for you to come into their tiny house, have access to amenities that are really nice, maybe a cold bath and a hot tub or whatever, but for them to conduct the process and work with you just for that night. And there's such an instantaneous recoil in me to see such an exaggerative price for mental health, for people who are wanting to work through traumas, blockages, who are really wanting to become healthier versions of themselves in a safe way that's controlled where they have a professional that can offer insight, lead, and guide. So it's such an exploitation, and it is materialization of spirituality at a level that is not supportive of the collective in terms of the evolution. It's an exploitation. And I see it in my coaching practice because many of my clients are people who are wanting to integrate their plant medicine experience. And so we start coaching prior, they go into medicine, and then we continue coaching for at least 3 months afterward. So they're integrating and they're taking what they've learned and they're utilizing it and embodying it and solidifying it with action, right? So it's moving from here to an expression outward, right? And some of these people have such a huge issue with following the dieta in terms of the nutrients that you're putting into your body, because there's actually a trauma, like how we eat is trauma based. We're looking at disassociating and distracting using high carbs, using sugar, using alcohol. And we look at people and their belief systems around protein, and that protein can only be received from animal products or from a slab of steak in front of you. And there's these attachments to beliefs, and it's just dieta is the process of examining belief systems. It's the medicine's already starting before you even
Exactly.
the ceremony just through dieta.
Absolutely. And it's examining belief systems and also examining your behaviors and addictions in a way. And the reality is that it's the liver that processes the psilocybin to psilocin, right? And so we actually do need to clean our body in order for our body to receive that. And the liver, oh my gosh, liver works so hard because it's processing toxins in the air, it's processing the toxins in our water, in our foods, and also in our emotions. The liver tends to store things such as anger, resent, and energy like that. And the liver is working really hard. And so we're asking the liver to be what transforms this medicine, and we're not willing to give the liver
Support
a
it.
break or clean it or support it. Again, it's like the energy of taking. And yeah, to me, the preparation will reveal so much to a human, and are they willing to look at it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And something that really stood out for me and really provoked something in me is when you brought up the reciprocity of being a plant medicine certified facilitator. The question you're asking yourself is what I'm giving you being received, and then what you're giving back to me of equal value, right? I love that you brought this up because recently a cohort, someone within the industry that I purchase software from to support my coaching business, learned about my ethos, my business ethos, and came back to validate and came back to applaud what it is that I'm doing. And so my ethos is very much based on this concept you brought up, which is reciprocity, energy matching energy, which is why a big part of my business is also barter. So pulling power away from money. So yeah, I need money for certain things that I can't barter, but a huge part of my business is barter. If I'm working with a client who is an electrician and my mom needs electrician done at her house, or I know somebody that needs something done at their house, wherever this client is in whatever state, I will create a barter. And maybe that doesn't come right back to me. This person, this client is bartering with somebody I know who needs something, but then that other thing comes back to me from the third party involved. So I create this transactional barter system. And I even, with my chiropractor for the longest time, I was bartering with him and supporting his business and getting the chiropractic needs that I needed. And for me, it's so bloody empowering to remove money or the concept of money, the energy of money from it. And I feel like the value and the worth that I'm giving, that I'm receiving is even higher than the value of the money, right? And for my program, I also have scholarship programs for those who make a certain amount of money and under, where there's workshops that they can access super intense coaching within 3-4 hours for such minimal amount of money. And I feel like if we, all of us service providers, were checking in with ourselves and saying, how am I supporting the collective that is despaired or disenfranchised? Like, how am I supporting that community and that collective? Then, like, how fucking beautiful. Talk about a utopia. Like, how beautiful is this work? If you're truly a light worker and that's how you see yourself, then ask the question is like, where are you pouring light into areas that are dark?
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that you barter in that way. That's really beautiful.
So
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm obviously as a
Yes.
licensed clinician, I
Different.
can't barter with my clients, but
Yeah.
I have sliding scales that has them pick the number that they feel they can afford, but also the number that is going to keep them accountable to their work
Yes.
uh, and showing up. Because I
Mhm.
think that we have such a connection to it in a way that it does create responsibility. But in my business is called Sweetgrass Therapeutics, and Sweetgrass is a teacher of reciprocity and weaving together. And it's a collective where there's multiple different healing practitioners who work in the space in reciprocity for using the studio space, the treatment rooms. I get acupuncture or I get massage as part of the energetic transaction that takes money out of the equation, but is still related to money in its own way. So I think that's beautiful. And the ways that we can do that, I think, are really supportive and us to step away and see abundance and prosperity in different kinds of ways.
So I'm wondering if we could delve into how you use it for the everyday person or can support the everyday person in utilizing some different forms of muscle testing to support them in learning their body and also leaning into intuition a bit.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful way of bringing in the nonverbal and bringing in somatics, right? Is teaching a person that their own body has the answers. And one of the things I teach people is that we can be like a pendulum and helping people to stand and find a place of equilibrium or find a place of balance in their body, which connects them to the breath. And then to have their body tell them, what is my yes? What is my no? And sometimes the yes is leaning forward. Sometimes the yes is leaning backwards. And then which is the no, your body's gonna tell you that. And then ask a question of something you need some clarity for and seeing which way your body's going to lean. I recently taught my daughter that and she was like, "Oh, that's so cool." And it's a way of learning to trust ourselves and a way of helping us to make a choice that is from the inside out, from that internal locus of control. If you have somebody who can help you do muscle testing, like with your arm, bringing your arm out to a place and asking a question, you'll see the arm is going to show weakness. And sometimes that can be the no for a person, or if the arm stays strong and steady, perhaps the muscles and the soma is telling you like there's an inner yes there. And so to me, those are a way of connecting with the body. But as you become more sensitive, you can literally sit and your breath and your sensations in the body are going to tell your inner yes or your inner no. And oftentimes we see it in the gut.
Yeah. Um, Which both have neurological pathways and are considered additional brains. So we have our skull brain, our heart brain, and our gut brain. And both are very powerful. It helps our all are very powerful in supporting us in making decisions. So we have the arm testing, which people can support us in terms of the resistance. And so the idea isn't to push as hard as you can against them creating the resistance, but just holding the arms up. Can I refrain from allowing them to push my arm down? And then we also see the same thing. People can, if they're by themselves, use their fingers as a form of muscle testing. We have the sitting, so standing or sitting. And then are your eyes closed when you ask your questions?
Yeah, I think eyes closed is more ideal, right? Because I think it gives you more of an inner awareness. But for some people, closing your eyes doesn't feel as safe or accessible. And so I think you can find a place in front of you that your eyes can softly gaze at and be in stillness. So that way you can focus on your body. Obviously, you don't want the eyes wandering because where the eyes go, the energy flows. I think that's important. And
And so you'll recognize whether your body is intuitively leaning forward, which is a yes for you, or if it's leaning backwards, which can be a no for you. And
Mhm.
there's also a pendulum, which is something I often keep tied around my wrist. There's fancy ones sold, or you can just make one. This one's made out of a couple of washers on twine. And
Really?
having your arm braced or supported on a table, and then recognizing that maybe right and yes, going back and forth means yes, which if you'll notice, my end's moving. And if I tell it to stop, it stops. And if
Yeah.
I can get it into a circular motion, then I can take it into a circular motion. But
Exactly.
setting that left and right mean yes, circular means no. And then asking your questions and allowing your body and the intuition to express itself to you in a way that maybe feels a little bit louder. And then as you become more trained into tapping into your intuition, such things are no longer needed. But I think it's a really great
Yeah.
entry into learning the inner voice of the body.
Absolutely. And it circles it all the way back to like ritual, right? This can become a kind of a ritual for a person to connect to their body. And the body always knows the answer.
Absolutely.
The body always knows.
So, for those who are interested in working with Jessica, her website will be provided and additional information in the show notes. And also to support the podcast and our give back program, she is donating anywhere from 75 to 90 minute somatic coaching session with her. And so remember, how we access these free services is by leaving a comment under your favorite episode about how the episode has empowered you or how it has moved you to support you on your journey. And I accumulate at the end of the month the comments or responses, both on YouTube and on Spotify, that echo that sentiment and feel very authentic. And I pick the top ones, and there's numerous sessions, swag. I also donate every month sessions with me, free coaching. And so this is a great way to feel some things out and decide whether or not coaching's for you or a form of therapy or somatic works for you. And Jessica's throwing in a very charitable and kind way a session that is available.
Yes. Yeah. Thank
So I
you.
just want to check in and see if there's anything that you feel called to bring up, or if you're feeling complete with this conversation.
Yeah. I think just letting people know different ways they could work with me.
Yeah.
So I'm a licensed therapist in the state of Colorado. And though much of my work is local with people who can see me in person, I do have clients who are able to see me virtually. And oftentimes, what that work looks like is we work together virtually for a period of time. And then they come out to come visit me and we do little intensives. So that looks anywhere from 3 to 5 days of a retreat type of setting. We have a personal chef. I bring in masseuses and acupuncturists and other body working practitioners to support me in that work. And they stay on my land here that is access to nature and outdoors and the river. And I do EMDR for people who are wanting to work through some traumas, but maybe you don't feel like weekly therapy is accessible because it's a lot to open and contain again. People can fly in and do that work with me if you're from out of state, and then you fly back home and work with your regular practitioner, your regular therapist. And so that's an option. And then I run lots of retreats and have a mailing list for that. The mailing list can be accessed through my website.
Beautiful. There's so many great things that you're offering to the general public, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to express my appreciation for your presence and your service and your compassion and kindness and how you are expressing yourself in this particular life.
Thank
So
you.
very appreciative. I have so much gratitude for you sitting down with me and having this conversation and being able to share your voice with those who are viewing.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. I'm really honored. It was such a rich conversation, and yeah, we could totally keep going for hours. Yeah. So
So
yeah,
Jessica,
thanks for the work you're doing.
thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you kindly.
Mm.